I'm David Poole. I'm the Procurement and Supply Chain Director for HS2. I've been with HS2 for about 6 months or so, a little bit more than 6 months now, having been with Highways England for about 10 years previously. So with Highways, we did some fairly big jobs, and the size and scale and kind of depth and penetration of HS2, I think, just surprises everybody who works on it. So I'll try and convey some of that as I sort of walk through the project. Just a little bit of history, though. This is, I don't know if any of you know Birmingham. I'm a Brummie. You might be able to tell from my dulcet tones. So this is where our Curzon Street station, our Birmingham station, will go in. That hotel there is the one that I had my wedding reception in. So this is quite real for me, because just opposite here, this photograph's about 3 or 4 months old. It doesn't look like that anymore now, because we've really started the ground preparation, the early works in real earnest. So it's changing, it's kind of real. As a project, HS2 started in 2009 and has been developing ever since. I'll walk you through the timeline, but it's real. It's kind of happening around us at the moment. In terms of what we're trying to build, or what we're going to build, I'll walk you through it's really a new spine in terms of the railway network. It's built in currently 3 phases. Phase 1, Phase 2A and Phase 2B, as only government can. You don't have 1, 2 and 3. You have clearly a more complex numbering system. So we come up from London Euston, a big interchange at Old Oak Common, which will be interchanged with Crossrail, then into Birmingham Interchange Station near the airport, and then into New Street. Sorry, not into New Street, into Curzon Street, which is just next to New Street Station in Birmingham. That for us is Phase 1. And then Phase 2A, we go up to Crewe on the blue lines to the left, and then Phase 2B, we extend the balance of the network. And not all of it is high-speed, new high-speed lines. Some of it, the trains will be able to operate on conventional networks, so we run right the way up to Glasgow and Edinburgh and Newcastle, with part of that journey being on conventional networks as well. As I say, it's a huge project. I'll walk through the timeline in a little bit more detail. But each of the core interchanges, there's whole stations to be built, East Midlands Hub, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham. Each of the stations is a significant civil engineering project on its own. So as I say, the size and scale is enormous. And at the same time, we're running obviously very closely and in an integrated way with the existing network. So the complexity of delivering this programme in that live network is pretty phenomenal. Just moving on. So in terms of HS2 vision, it's all about growth across the UK. It's much more than the immediate cities that are directly on the network. The country needs good rail links, and for those, I know Sue Percy, I don't think she's made it yet, but there's problems on our existing network in terms of capacity and in terms of reliability. And HS2 is really about capacity rather than about speed. Everybody thinks it's about speed, but it's really about building capacity. If you're going to build more capacity, then you clearly invest in an up-to-date railway network, and you'd invest in a high-speed one. Just some of the numbers in terms of capacity. Out of London Euston, currently there's just over 12,000 seats at peak time. And in 2033 with HS2, there'll be over 30,000. It's fairly profound in terms of the step change in capacity that this will deliver on the railway network. But that extends not just for London into Manchester, where it's more than doubling, and the same for Leeds as well. I came up to Leeds actually a few months ago and was involved in some of the stakeholder engagement up here. And it's tangible what it will mean to the city in terms of growth and in terms of new opportunities and economic opportunities for the region. It's also about reducing journey time. That's clearly what makes the case. So it's less about speed and more about journey time. And if you look at some of these changes, London to Manchester, not quite halving it. Birmingham to Manchester, 40 minutes instead of 1 hour. 1.5 hours. These are fairly profound changes in time, and they will change the way that the economy works. Because for Birmingham to, say, Newcastle, the time reduction in that will mean that economic relationships and business relationships are that much easier. So I think we will open up new corridors of trading and new corridors of business relationships all around the country. Moving on, as I say, it's not just about the high-speed network. So there's over 25 stations that will be served using a combination of the new high-speed network and where high-speed trains are running on the conventional network. It crosses the whole of the country. So in the northeast, there's 2.5 million people live in the northeast, and it contributes 45 billion to the UK economy. And this will profoundly change the linkage between the northeast and the balance and the rest of the country. Same for the northwest, 7 million people and 3.5 million jobs. And this will fundamentally change the business relationships that make sense and are economic. It will be we aim to be an absolute catalyst for growth across the UK. Some of the other economic opportunities, clearly all of these areas, trade, retaining skilled graduates, local and regional markets, new employment, new investment and new exports are all opened up and facilitated by HS2, not just when we're built and when we're operational, in terms of all of those things being easier because transport connections are better, but during the process of building HS2, we have an enormous opportunity with the supply chain to catalyse these things as well, to develop the skills in the UK, to develop capability in the UK, and then sell and export that capability across Europe and beyond. That is all part very much of the HS2 story and part of how we're set up to build a railway. I'll come back to that in a moment when I talk specifically about supply chain. In terms of project timeline, I touched on 2009 when the idea kind of germinated and HS2 was originally set up. It took till 2012 to get to a confirmed strategy and 2016 to get to a confirmed route. And then February 2017 was Royal Assent for Phase 1. We're now in the process of going through the parliamentary process around Phase 2A and all the consultation and committee stage for that, with a view that Royal Assent will be completed in 2019. Clearly, there's quite a lot of variables around the parliamentary timetable at the moment, and a plan for 2023 for Royal Assent for Phase 2B. Phase 1 is due to open in 2026. Phase 2A 2027, then 2033 for Phase 2B. So it's quite a long project as well. I had the conversation with my mum actually when I joined HS2. What are you doing, Dave? It's only a project. And I did just point out actually it's a project that's longer than the rest of my career. So, there's not too many worries there. It's enormous, the scale of it. And at the moment, in terms of Phase 1, we're at the early work stage. So lots of ground investigation work, lots of preparatory work. And if you go into London, lots of exhumations and clearing land and all the rest of it that's got to be done well in advance. Strategic goals, I've mentioned these and I referred to them already. But we've got 7 strategic goals. A catalyst for growth, and that's twofold: during construction and clearly after construction while we're doing the project. Capacity and connectivity, I've talked about that. Value for money, we are trying to bring the best from all areas of rail and the broader construction industry, and best practice in terms of how we're building it and how we're setting up relationships to drive progress. Customer experience, there's a huge amount of work around that. It's quite difficult, if I'm absolutely honest. The pace of change in terms of technology, I'm sure some of you have been to the Google and Uber presentations today. But how do you plan for a ticketing experience in 2026? That's quite a challenge at the moment because, all we can do at the moment is develop the IT infrastructure that can deal with a very broad range of possibles and then figure out how late we can make the decision around ticketing strategy and ticketing methodology. Skills and employment, I'm going to focus on that for the rest of my presentation. Health, safety and security, we are absolutely setting out to be the safest railway that's been built in the UK and set new standards in terms of how the construction industry operate. And then, as far as possible, to be sustainable and a good neighbour. It's a really big ask with the land take that we have and the number of parcels of land that we're procuring through our land and property team. Not everybody is going to have a positive experience of that, but we're trying to set our processes up that we are, as far as possible, a good neighbour in terms of how we operate. So HS2 will provide jobs and skills across the UK. I'll come to it in a moment in terms of the shape of the peak, but it's about 30,000 jobs during construction, about 2,000 new apprentices. We have apprentice targets in for ourselves and in all of our contracts, and we require our supply chain to roll those down. So we're aiming for about 2,000 new apprentices. And then in 2026 and beyond, about 3,000 jobs to maintain and operate. But the key then is the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are created through regeneration and through growth around the network and in terms of the stations and the hubs that come with it. One of the things that we've invested in to catalyse that is the National College for High Speed Rail. Its main centre is in Birmingham, but it has a Doncaster campus as well. And the intention there is to support a whole range of skills that High Speed 2 will need, both in construction and also in operation. So these colleges have been set up to support the apprentice pipeline that we need and the other skills pipelines that we need at other levels of education too. In terms of labour skills and demands, there's 3 peaks when we will need construction labour and all of the labour market to build the railway. The first one is about 2021-22, when there's about 30,000 people involved at peak in construction. It then drops away, and then phase 2A, the stretch from Birmingham up to Crewe, which is a much, much smaller peak, but it's quite an accelerated programme in terms of construction, so it is a peak. And then farther out, 31-32, there's a second peak around phase 2B and build. Combined labour about just over 30,000 and about 280,000 people years in terms of labour input. And there's a mix between construction and rail. In terms of how High Speed 2 has gone to market, we've actually separated to a large degree the civil works and the rail works that go on top of it. And that's really about packaging in terms of access to the market because of the peaks that we have to manage through that, and trying not to constrain the market unnecessarily. So labour and skills demand, we've done a huge amount of work, as you would imagine, in assessing how big an impact we're going to have on the UK market, and there are definitely some tight spots. So I'll just walk through some of those around civils, as defined in the NEC definition. At peak will be about 20% of the UK market. For signalling systems and telecoms will be about 7%, about 20% of track, and about 15% of electricians. It's a huge project in terms of some of the size and scale when you look at the impact we'd like to have on the economy. So we have to prepare for that, and that's very much what we're trying to do at the moment. We've got 4 objectives across skills, employment and education. I'm just going to focus on one, which is about creating sustainable skills, employment and education opportunities in the supply chain through using procurement levers. So our procurement process and our supply chain management team is very much focused on this, not just about preparing for our own construction peaks, but about the legacy that we leave behind. And market engagement, this is 2016 numbers, so apologies for that. But HS2 has engaged across the UK in terms of who we've met in suppliers and who we've tried to stimulate and encourage and catalyse into the HS2 supply chain. So run over 100 events in 3 years, 5,000 businesses directly engaged, and tens of thousands through business networks and deeper relationships. And then two times Meet the Contractor events, MTC. The acronyms in HS2 are absolutely scary. But Meet the Contractor events, so just after I joined, actually, about May time, there was an enormous event in Birmingham where we pulled in all of the main works contractors working on our 7 first-tier contracts and ran through effectively speed dating with suppliers who could could register their interest, and tried to stimulate. I think there was 1,400 companies, SMEs, and companies from all levels of the supply chain. Now, that doesn't mean that one's going to walk away with a successful business relationship, but it certainly catalyses an awful lot of relationships. And we've been very focused around putting out supply resources, so not just concentrating on the first tier that we're contracting with, but actually helping smaller suppliers lower down the supply chain to actually make sure they can get business, to understand how to bid, how to prepare themselves, how to pitch themselves, and what's required on all aspects of working for HS2. It's been an enormous supplier engagement programme. In terms of how we assess suppliers within the procurement process, we've concentrated on this too, so taking our environmental aims, economic aims and social aims and making them really part of the procurement process, so that if a supplier addresses these and presents a credible case for how they'll address them in their supply chain, then that's a positive advantage in the procurement process. And we don't just do it in the procurement, we also do it in the supplier scorecard that we use in contract to measure performance and manage performance. So the plans that we require, skills, education, employment plans, cover apprenticeships, worklessness, and education and career support all through our supply chain. We require not just our first tiers, but we require them to roll it down too. So the ambition is that the requirements roll down first tier, second tier, third tier, and then we measure outcomes on the way back up as well. So there's a requirement to report back on that. I think there's an argument that says that's a lot of work, but I think there's good evidence from other sectors that unless you do that work to make sure it's happening all the way through your supply chain, it doesn't happen. And because of the size and scale of the opportunity, we're determined to make sure it does roll through our supply chain. So, setting out the best of Britain, these are some of the quotes really that relate to HS2 at all levels of government. And I've got the quote over there from Judith in Leeds. At all levels of government and across the UK, there's a great deal of optimism, I think, around the HS2 programme and the growth that it can drive and the positive influence that it can have on the economy. The reason for coming to talk to this audience is because we're not building this for my generation. This is all about your generation and the kids who are at school, who actually, if we can catch them into apprenticeships and STEM subjects now, they'll be the operators and the users of this network. And it's really important that as a business we reach out and just recognise that's what we're building it for.
I have two questions. The first one is about, are there any... So the network at the moment, there are many delays. The train operators, I would say they don't compare, for example, to the ones in Europe, in continental Europe. So are there any plans to improve the situation before HS2 comes forward so that the integration is better? That's the first question. And the second question is, what are the equality considerations in your procurement?
Okay. So in terms of the existing rail network, I'm not an expert on the existing rail network at all. In this presentation, one of the bits I skipped over was the £40 billion of investment the government's putting into the existing network on top of the investment in HS2. It won't be enough in terms of capacity, but to address some of the concerns that you raise, I would hope that that's exactly where it's being targeted. So I think it's a parallel approach at a government level. In terms of equality and EDI, absolutely. I didn't talk to that specifically. It runs through HS2. It's everywhere. It's part of the DNA. When I was at Highways England, I was the EDI champion there, and focused on EDI right the way through. Joining HS2, you almost don't need me to be doing that, because it is very much the heart of how they operate within the business and also into the supply chain engagement too. So yes, massive priority. If we don't address that, there will not be enough of the typical people who work in construction to fill this pipeline. So equality has to be part of the solution.
Obviously, there's an awful lot of opportunities around HS2, and as you say, it's a huge project. So there's every reason to believe economy of scale and people working together and everything should be effective. One of your 7 strategic goals, I think, was value for money. Mm-hmm. We do hear things in the media, people saying that HS2 is not value for money, that it doesn't deliver on that. Can you respond to that? What it seems it should be,
yeah.
But obviously there's an evidence base. Some people believe that it isn't. Well, where's the disconnect? Because real facts, fake facts. What's the HS2 position? Why is there this contrary view that we shouldn't have this major infrastructure project?
So I think in terms of, I can talk about the business case for HS2. The business case for HS2 and the economic benefit of it in delivering additional rail capacity at higher speed is clear. That's the investment case that the government has set out. In terms of different perspectives and viewpoints. I'm not going to kind of respond to every one of those. I think, you know, some of those are driven by local concerns, and some are driven by, you know, a different perspective on what the investment priorities for the country are. And this is about decisions. You know, it clearly is about decisions. You could invest, make this government level strategic investment. You could spend that money on different things. There is a business case for HS2. It's robust, it's been tested, and that's what the government has chosen to deliver. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on. At best value for money too, you know, because the better we can make that value for money case, the better for the country.
As you're aware, the Curzon Street station is right outside Birmingham City University, and I work on the travel plans for Birmingham City University, and a lot of the students' concerns at the moment is the cost of travel, and I'm quite concerned about whether the cost of, obviously, ticketing for HS2 will ostracise students, which I think are the most important component of the economy.
That's really quite a complex question, actually. So the challenge is the students who are currently students won't be students by the time this is operational. So the whole economy is moving through. The core of the question is, what's the ticketing policy and what's the pricing policy for the railway? So the bottom line is ticketing pricing isn't set yet. The strategy to build a railway and to run a railway and deliver additional capacity, that's the strategic vision. Those decisions are quite a way down the track in terms of the operational, how the railway will operate and run. But it doesn't make any sense. It goes without saying, it doesn't make any sense if you build a railway to deliver additional capacity and set a pricing policy so it doesn't get used. So, you know, I probably won't be around at that stage, but it makes no sense not to use the asset. So the pricing policy will be set on the basis that it gets used. It has to be.